As many of you know, I was away out of the country for 2 weeks again at the beginning of this month. For the second time in about 3 months, I traveled to Israel and repeated with Shanti as my companion a pilgrimage that I had taken at the beginning of November. Sort of a little bit of surprise in my life at this point to have developed such a strong rapport with that country, but it seems that I have, so here we are. It was a wonderful trip, and for all the reasons that the first one was visiting the places where Jesus had lived, and really sort of becoming at home in these very holy places. It's a very interesting experience how familiarity and a sense of ease in a high vibration place, at least for me, increases the inspiration rather than the opposite. It's part of what our scripture is trying to talk about today, and I'll come at it from many different angles. It's the realization that these high spiritual realities belong to us, and that they're not essentially different from who we are. And it's a fine line to maintain a sense of respect and reverence, but also the relaxation that enables us also to be receptive. Swami Kriyananda came to Paramhansa Yogananda when Swamiji was 22. 3.5 years later, Yogananda had his Mahasamadhi. So Swami was not quite 26. Most of us, all of us, knew Swamiji much later. Some of you knew him very late in his life or missed his physical incarnation altogether. And his absolute dedication to Master was so complete that sometimes it was a little startling when I actually did the math and realized what a short period of time he had with him and what a complete neophyte Swamiji was during that whole period of time. Now, of course, there's no such thing as a neophyte because we inhabit bodies, and those bodies have certain ages and certain capacities and certain experiences, but the consciousness, the individual jiva, the soul that comes into it, is neither 2 years old nor 40 nor 106. And when we end one incarnation and we have completed to the best of our ability whatever spiritual progress we're capable of making, and we leave that body and go to the astral world, but if we're not liberated, eventually we come back into another physical body, it's not like the slate is wiped clean. We move according to the pattern that is in our chakras. That pattern is who we actually are. Our astral body is that vibration of energy unmasked. So it's that pattern of energy that eventually magnetizes us into another physical body, but that pattern of energy in itself is not diminished merely by taking on a physical body. It just becomes dulled a little bit by matter. So now let me just find all the pieces of this because I've lost it in the clunking of the microphone. Give me a moment here. Oh, I was talking about familiarity, that's right. So age, Swami used this wonderful phrase once. He said, physical age is the most trivial definition of a person, which I thought was just a fun way to say it, even going all the way down, extending to children. It's we are what our consciousness is, and whether we're 90, it doesn't make us wiser. If we aren't wise, it just makes us older in that physical body. So Swamiji was a young man when he was with Master. Master left, and then after that, his entire spiritual life was based on his inner attunement. He remained in the ashram of his guru for about a decade more and had the support and company of fellow disciples, but even that was taken away from him by the time he was 36. And so he was depending entirely on his inner attunement with Master. And when Swamiji went to India for the first time as a disciple, he went in 1958. And one of the great saints that he met there was Anandamoyi Ma. Anandamoyi Ma has a whole chapter devoted to her in Autobiography of a Yogi, the joy-permeated mother, Master called her. Anandamoyi Ma means the mother filled with bliss. That was what she was called. And Swamiji had an extraordinarily close relationship with her. Ma herself said things about how unique the connection between them was and how deeply attuned Swamiji was to her. But Swamiji said, among other things that happened with Anandamoyi Ma, he said he had the kind of relationship with her that he was too inexperienced to have with Master, that he was simply too young. I asked Swamiji once, I said something, we were talking, and I said something very cheeky, a humorous remark, but I was teasing him about something, and it was a common occurrence between us. And I suddenly saw how cheeky I was being with someone that I had so much spiritual regard for, and this anxiety suddenly came over me that perhaps what I was doing was really inappropriate. And I said, "Sir, did you ever tease Master?" And Swami sort of looked shocked like that, which increased my sense of anxiety all of a sudden. But he said, "Oh no," he said, "I was much too in awe of Master." He said, "I wasn't afraid of him." He said he wasn't closed to him in any way. It wasn't that he felt that he had to protect himself, but he said he was just always so conscious of Master's spiritual grandeur that he could never be completely natural in his company. But he said by the time he got to Anandamoyi Ma, he understood the word chela. Chela is a word that is usually translated as disciple, but you can see that the origin word of disciple is discipline, which is a good word, and it's a word that we really need. But the origin word for chela is child, and not childish, and not even childlike, but child in relationship to the Guru, and with all that that implies in terms of freedom and intimacy and absolute confidence. Some of you have heard me tell, but I want to remind you again, when we started going to India in 1987, when I say we for about 20 years, every year or two, we took a group of 30 or so people on a pilgrimage to India and went to the places that were related to Autobiography of a Yogi. I mean, that project still goes on to these days. It's just other people are in charge of it now. And so we went to 4 Garpar Road, where Master lived with his family when he was growing up, and where the Ghosh family, Master's family, still lives to this day. But when we came in, starting in 87, an older generation that is now passed was still there. Hare Krishna Ghosh, who was Master's direct nephew, the son of Master's brother Sananda, and Hare Krishna's sister Shefli. Now, when Master went back to India in 1935, that was the only time he returned for about 18 months. In 1935, he went to 4 Garpar Road. His father was still living, Sananda was still living, and Hare Krishna, whom we met as an old man, was 15 years old. And his sister, who was considerably younger than him, was 3. So Hare Krishna was old enough to be able to relate to Master as his guru in an adolescent, but nonetheless more of an adult manner. And Hare Krishna has many memories of Master being there, and Sananda was an artist. And Master in India during that time was also getting ready to write and publish Autobiography of a Yogi. So he was systematically collecting and doing many things. And one of the things he did is he sat with his brother and he helped his brother draw a picture of Babaji, which is the picture that's at the top of the cross behind me. Babaji is the deathless Himalayan guru who doesn't appear to most people, but Master had seen him in the flesh and knew what he looked like, and by intuition and instruction, he helped Sananda draw that picture. Hare Krishna sat on the other side of Sananda when that whole project happened. And he would tell us about being on the roof terrace when they were working on it and so on. They were wonderful stories, and many others, and about Sri Teshwar visiting their house, and just many things that were just beautiful to hear. Much of it is, if you go onto the internet, you can find it, because at different times people filmed him. Now, Shefli, however, was 3. And we didn't meet Shefli for the first few times we came, but gradually the story came out. So Shefli is 3 years old. She meets her guru. She's with him in form only during that period of time. And so my first natural thought, being a mind-oriented person, was, what a waste. Isn't that how we think? You want to be able to talk, you want to be able to have experiences. I'm a writer, you want to be able to take notes and then put it into books and then put it into talks, all these different things, none of which was possible when she was 3. But of course, because she was 3, she didn't have the slightest inhibition in her relationship to Master. And the whole family tells the story about how she was absolutely drawn to him. He totally responded to her feelings, and whenever he would come into the house, she would just rush over to him, grab him by the leg, cling to him, and absolutely refuse to be parted from him. Now, let's make a definition of how to be a devotee. As soon as there's a crack of light, you run to it, you cling to it, and you absolutely refuse to be parted from it. You don't need words for that. You don't need to be able to drive a car or have a college degree. In fact, all that stuff begins to confuse us, doesn't it? Because we have so many ideas in our head that the simplicity of what we're doing is absolutely lost. There's one of the most touching stories about Shefli, which we always love to hear. When Shefli would tell these stories, she didn't speak English, and she was shy even about speaking at all, and she would sort of stand off to the side and kind of whisper it to Hare Krishna, and then Hare Krishna would tell us these stories. So it was a little hard to gauge her own involvement in it, but you could still feel between the two of them. And there was the story that was told that for one night they all decided to go to the movies. And little children were not allowed into the movie theater. But when Shefli saw that Master was about to leave, she was simply not going to allow him to leave without her. And she made such a fuss about it that Master picked her up, put her on his, she was Indian children. Shefli was a small woman anyway, and Indian little children tend to be pretty small. So even though she was 3, he put her on his chest and he buttoned his overcoat over her. And then just took her into the movie theater. And so she spent the whole movie resting against his heart. Now, is that good karma or bad karma to be only 3? Isn't that just what we're trying to do? You see, that's what chela is. And chela is the real word for being a disciple. Yes, the discipline is there, but in the weirdest sort of way, what we're trying to discipline is we're trying to discipline all these completely crazy ideas that we aren't little children who can just refuse to be separated from the Master no matter what happens. That's the discipline. There's all this force that comes that says we have to do this and we have to do that and we have to worry about this and we have to behave this way. And Swamiji said he trusted Master completely. He was completely at ease with him, but he was in awe of him. That was the right word. And so the idea of making a joke, or not making a joke, but teasing him. He said Dr. Lewis would tease Master. He said he was the only disciple who was able to do it. Because Dr. Lewis and Master met when they were both young men in their 20s. And Dr. Lewis was Master's first disciple in America. And this was like in the 20s. And Master didn't write Autobiography of a Yogi until 1946. It's an important thing to realize. And to a very large extent, Swamiji said, Master did not present himself in the fullness of who he was. He didn't emphasize that I am one with God. It didn't serve his mission for him to speak like that. In fact, the way Swami put it, which was an interesting point once, Swami was constantly in his life trying to sort out the fact that his perception of Master and the perception of his fellow disciples, especially the women who ended up being charge of Master's organization, he said they just saw things so differently. But Swamiji himself realized that he didn't come until 1948, whereas Dayamata, who ended up being president of SRF for some 50 years, she came when she was 17 in, was it the 30s, like that. So she had all these other experiences with Master that Swamiji never had. She felt that qualified her to understand him better. Swamiji presented the thought that it caused her to understand him somewhat differently. Because Master himself, when he first came, this is how Swami put it, it was very important for him to emphasize the fact that he was not essentially different from the people he was talking to, and that he'd realized God and they could too. And Master said somewhat with some amusement, he said, in India they understand that it's very difficult to realize God. So people say, yes, someday, maybe, after my karma is done, then maybe I'll realize God. He said in America, Americans had no idea what it meant to realize God. So in our confident enthusiasm, we said, sure, we can do it. And because of that, to a large extent, Master said, we were able to. I mean, not everyone, but you understand. So he presented himself as just not essentially different. And it was only at the end of his life, not because his actual state of realization changed, but Master wasn't really there except as a window. And the window in relation to the sun had a purpose, and the sun had a purpose shining through it, and gradually it shifted. So he was much more in the impersonal Vedantic side of things, just much less there as a person and much more just there as the window through which the infinite shone. Swamiji said it was so confusing for him to think, because he knew that just like the conversation that was happening in what was read today, this is God himself, this is a perfect manifestation of God, but the perfect manifestation of God is having dinner in the next room. And he just couldn't put the pieces together. And that was sort of the sense of awe. But when he met Ma, and when he was there with Ma, actually by then it would be 1958, so it was actually only 10 years later. But after 10 years, he recognized that I am a chela. And he wasn't Ma's disciple. It wasn't that he stopped being Master's disciple, but the connection between those two great souls was so close that it was the same. And Ma's respect for Swami's discipleship to Master was so complete that there was no sense of conflict. But Swami recognized, I am a chela. I'm more than a disciple. I am a chela. And that means that this is my mother. And it wasn't because she was in a feminine body that Swami saw her that way. Mother means, what is the most intimate relationship for the child? The mother's body from which the child is born, or the female person who picks up the helpless infant and ensures that it will survive, literally holds grows the child within her own body and sacrifices her own self to make it happen. As some mothers often say, you lived under my heart, which is just such a beautiful way to put it. And all of you women who have borne children are smiling at me, and I know you know what I'm talking about. I haven't borne children in this incarnation. I'm going to tell you an extremely funny story that Devi used to tell about the time her son was born. Devi and Jyotish. Devi, forgive me, I hope this is okay. They have one son, and he was born in 1976, a long time ago. And at that time at Ananda, we had a very capable midwife, and most women gave birth at home. And Devi's labor came on to her somewhat suddenly, and there hadn't been that many births at Ananda, so no one was that smart about how this worked. But Devi is very brave, and she was progressing through it, and the midwife hadn't yet arrived, and Devi wasn't aware of the fact, neither she nor Jyotish, who I guess were alone at that point, didn't realize how far she'd progressed. And as as you may know, and as I understand, there's what they call the transition in the birth where the energy really shifts. And Devi became slightly anxious during that period of time, which is apparently common. And Jyotish, in an attempt to relax her, said, Devi, you know, in all of your incarnations, you've probably given birth to enough children to populate the entire city of Sacramento. And in the midst, you know, of giving birth to her first and only child, Devi said the image that came into her mind was of an all-night Denny's coffee shop. And all these more or less vagrant people just wandering in and out. And she thought of all of them were babies, you know, that she'd given birth to at one time or another. And even in the moment, she thought to herself, if he'd said Rishikesh or Paris, you know. But instead he said Sacramento. You know? And of course she laughed. And when she laughed, the tension broke and everything went forward. And of course the birth was fine. The boy is a wonderful man. He lives today, you know, like this. Now, coming back to it. You know, the most intimate relationship we have in the physical world is the relationship with the mother. Not everybody has a good mother. You know, not everybody is blessed with a mother who has the graciousness of spirit to know how to be a mother. But all of us understand what that means. And the single greatest longing of the human heart is to be seen and understood. There's slangs, there's different slangs that grow up that are, some of them are better than others. Swami was never much of a fan of slang. The one slang phrase he did like was, been there, done that. He thought that was a very succinct statement of a very important philosophical idea. But one of the other ones that I hear people say when they talk about, oh, I'm having this new romance and he's so wonderful, and they say, so-and-so really gets me. And they don't mean gets to me, but they mean they understand. I make sense to them, you know? And I mean, that's like super high praise in a friendship, isn't it? Somebody really understands me. Why is that so extraordinary to us? Because we have this ages-old, completely false, but so deeply embedded belief that we are alone and we are separate. Now, it's very subtle because we are singular. This is the weird thing about it, which our reading was trying to talk to us about today. You know, that there is this individuality that is eternal and we are unique. And at the same time, in that individuality, we are part of the whole. You can't make any sense with your mind with it. I mean, philosophers and religionists and theologians and dogmaticians and priests and institutions, you know, just make up all these rules and all these different descriptions because you just literally can't understand it, but you can feel it. Everyone can feel it. We live with this almost unbearable, irresolvable reality, which is that we feel separate and yet we know we belong to the whole. And so we're always looking around for somebody else who gets me, who actually looks at me and really sees me. And Swami also tells us, Master said so too, that there is an actual partner for each person. There is a true soulmate. We are in fact dual, and there is another individual somewhere in creation that is actually our exact match. And we eventually, as we merge into the wholeness of things, we also have a union with that reality. And in the meantime, which is, whoa, is that ever a long time? Swamiji once made a suggestion to me that if I followed a certain, a pattern of my spiritual life, that everything else would resolve, and I love the phrase he used, in relatively short order. He said, relatively short order. I'm a wordsmith, and he knew it. What on earth did he mean by that? Did he mean tomorrow? Did he mean 1,000,000 lifetimes from now? In relatively short order. Compared to what? Relative to what? To my impatience or to infinity? When I asked Swamiji a question once that I thought was a very interesting question, it was proposed to me by someone else, but I carried it. Master said he remembered back to being a diamond. That was the beginning of his conscious individuality, was at the level of a crystal, of a diamond. So someone asked me, how long do you last as a diamond, you know? How long does it take to evolve from a diamond? I had a whole host of further questions, which I never got going with Swami. Like, after a diamond? Like what? You know? And then, is there hierarchy among the trees, among the flowers? But I only got the first question out. How long are you a diamond? Swami, he wasn't often as rude as this. But he said, with a smile, that's a really stupid question. By that time, I was more of a chela than a disciple, so I said, I don't think so. I thought it was fascinating. I really wanted to know. And then he just sort of ignored me for a moment. But then he said, compared to eternity, all time is short. And you know, the mind just kind of stops, because we weigh and we measure, we weigh and we measure. And we're always in this time-oriented, but compared to eternity, once you move to the center of eternity, you saw it never even happened. Once that unity of us and everything comes to us, which, you know, trust me, I'm still waiting for it too, but I have deeper and deeper faith that it's going to come in relatively short order, you know. But there is this paradox we live with. I am totally alone, and yet I am part of everything. And there's no resolution to it with words. The best we can do is to be a channel for that which we're trying to become. The channel is blessed by that which flows through it. We are really nothing at all except the energy that flows through us. This physical body is just going to go away. You know, many of you know that very recently someone dear in our congregation, Christy Norfleet, she passed away, and I was there, and Shanti and her husband, who's now called Yudhishthira, was also there. And because Shanti was a medical doctor, we sort of dealt with Christy's empty body more than I have ever, in the times that I've been with people, I've never actually been as physically involved with the empty body. But because she was a doctor, she was very comfortable with doing that. And I have thought so much since then about the fact that there she was and there she wasn't. Just like there she was and there she wasn't. And the body, because it was minutes, still looked exactly like her. But it wasn't her. You know, that we are simply the energy that flows through us. We are not the face, the body, the age, the gender, none of it. We are the vibration of consciousness that we choose to tune into and express. And so the end of all this impossible, incomprehensible contradiction of finding ourselves here, why are we here? Who knows? But what would we like to be here? Love, joy, kindness, forgiveness, unity, friendship. Swamiji said that one of the most important missions of Ananda is true friendship. Isn't that interesting? You know, Jesus said to his disciples, they will know that you are my disciples because you love one another. That's who we are, that's what we're trying to be, and the instrument is blessed by what flows through it. So let us choose carefully and become true chelas. Be like little Shefli. When we see that light, let's just run to it and refuse to be parted no matter what. And God will have no choice but then to put us next to his heart and wrap us up in his overcoat and take us with him wherever he goes. God bless you.
Love is all I know, sun rays on the snow of a winter long, in darkness without song. Oh, flung lifetimes away. Imagine you did not care. I know now your smile was mine all the while. I listened and love was there. I can't breathe for love. All the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam. Only love can heal all the pain I feel. What a fool was I to turn away. I can't breathe for love. All the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam. Only love can heal all the pain I feel. What a fool was I to turn